Hello, YouTubers. I want to welcome you to another edition of Bargain Bin Gear. Okay. Now, last time we were looking at the finishing up the series on the project of the PB bass cabinet and speaker for kind of bass emulation type things. And I said we were going to look at this little pedal board, and we need to finish that up too. However, I ran across something that is kind of in between both, and that is a compressor pedal, to be exact. Now, I think it's probably one of the most maybe misunderstood or confusing pedals there are compressor pedals. I mean, what is a compressor? What does it do? Right? Well, in my experience, and I mean, I'm by no means an expert. In the past, a compressor pedal was kind of it was an effect for sure, right? Because it was used in serial mode, in other words, one pedal after another. And it always reminded me, especially on clean sounds, of squashing the guitar signal, and it gave it kind of reminds me very much of Andy Summers of the Police, for example. That kind of clean guitar sound, especially on songs like Every Breath You Take and stuff like that. Okay. Now, turns out it does a lot more than that. For one, it provides a lot more sustain, right? If you hit a note on a guitar, it'll play that note and then kind of die off, right? With a sustain, it takes it a lot longer to die off, okay? Because what it does is it squashes the signal, and then you can bring it up, right? Kind of like you do if you were mastering a wave file or that kind of thing. These days, with modern compressors, now there's parallel compressors, and that's basically where it has a blend knob where you can blend your original signal along with the compressed signal. And what happens there is it acts almost as a boost, right, without really affecting the sound, the overall sound, other than volume wise and gain wise, and it kind of smooths it out, okay? But it doesn't give you that kind of old school compressor type sound that was so much of an effect that you couldn't use it all the time. I usually don't use a compressor at all, and yet I play clean guitar, right? However, and this is what I wanted to show you today, I found an interesting way of using a compressor. Now, a lot of times they say, well, okay, where in your signal chain would you use a compressor, right? And a lot of people say, oh, it's got to be the first pedal in your signal chain, because it boosts your guitar signal and then into the effects. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's one way of using it. Another one is to use it after distortion. That's a very common way of using it as well. However, I've discovered that there's alternatives to that, and that is using a pedal at the end of your chain, your signal chain, your compressor at the end of your signal chain, which is a little unusual. And I mean, I've never done that before, and I'm quite pleased with the results. All right, now think of this. Typically a compressor, right, it amplifies, makes louder soft notes, right, and kind of limits really loud notes, if you like. And as a result, you get a much smoother sound. That's another thing it can do, okay? And as a result, the gain can be brought up. In other words, the overall sound can be made louder. Now, and maybe this is obvious to some, I don't know. But for me, I just never really used the compressor all that much, you know. I think I've used one like distortion stuff, you know, that kind of thing. Now, so here's what happened, basically. And I wanted to show you this because I think it's quite very interesting in any case, you know. And that is that, well, I put the as an experiment, really, I put the compressor at the end of the signal chain, right, at the very, very end. In other words, I go through all my pedals, including the looping pedal, which is usually the last pedal. And the looping pedal, all of that goes into a compressor at the very end, right? Which to me seems very bizarre, because I would never have guessed to have put a pedal after the looper, you know? Thought it would mess things up. However, it was very, very interesting, because one thing it did is my bass emulations, right, especially coming off of loops and things, man, it really makes it sound more like a bass than just the little, I use a Electro-Harmonix Bass 9, or any octave pedal can do this, you know, make it sound like a bass. But man, add a compressor after that, wow. And probably the same with one before it, you know. I don't know, I haven't tried that. In any case, but then on top of that, it also made my clean sounds, I think, sound a little bit better, a little smoother, a little bolder, a little bigger, more sustain and those kinds of things. And man, when it can do both of those, and here's the best part, it's still, at least with the compressor that I was using, right, it didn't sound like the compressor rolled, you know, where it affected the sound so much you'd never want it on all the time. Whereas here, you don't get the characteristics of the old compressor. I mean, you can't tell really that you're using a compressor at all. Ow! Mitty. Hi, Mitty. Mitty jumped on my back. Ouch. Mitty. Okay, in any case, where was I? Yes. Basically, it gave me a much bigger sound, if you like, right? And overall, to my ear anyway, more balanced sound between the bass emulation and the guitar sounds as well, you know, and a much bigger sound, sound more even, more consistent is a good word, you know. And that would make sense because, you know, it's boosting some notes, lowering the volume of others, and there. Now, I'm not overusing it, but it's very much almost like a boost pedal, and you'll see that in the example. It's quite something, really. And So I'm rethinking the compressor pedal, you know, and the kind of compressor pedal that you could leave on all the time, right? And I never thought that I would do that, but as an experiment I tried it and I was like, oh, wait a minute, hey, this is sounding really good. Now, there's a couple caveats and I've yet to see if that's exactly true. But that is, you know, is boosting the signal quite a bit. And as a result, you can use your tube amps or whatever amp you're using at a lower volume and get basically about the same sound as you would if had you turned it up, the amp, you know, as if you had turned up the amp volume. And you'll see that, I'll show you that in the playing examples. And that's really great. However, I could see where, you know, especially on a tube amp, at some point it breaks up. And if you want a clean sound, right, you can only push it so hard. Well, if you use a compressor, right, you could push that a little too far into distortion, into breakup, basically. So you wouldn't get a nice clean sound. It'd be kind of, you see what I mean? So that's one thing I'm going to look into and see. But I know that at least at lower volume levels, I was quite stunned, really. And it did make it sound overall better. You know. So, pretty interesting. It's something I hadn't thought about. Alright. So here we go. I've got the compressor at the end of the chain here. And I've just recorded a little loop just to take a listen to it and see the difference. Alright, so I'm going to play it now. I'm going to play the loop and without the compressor. And it sounds like this. And basically we have a bass amp and two guitar amps. I'm kind of doing a bass emulation thing. Pretty simple loop here. So let's take a listen to that. Turn on the compressor. Yeah, so now I'm going to play the same loop, but with the compressor on. We'll start it with it off and then I'll turn it on. Okay, so here's with it off. Now turn it on. Turning on the compressor. With the compressor on. That's with it Okay, so definitely a huge difference there. And very much on the bass, emulation especially. I mean, if I'm playing just a bass line, whatever it is, you know, just... Okay, and now turn on the compressor. Right, all of a sudden you get this, so let's say I was doing just a bass loop. I'll turn the compressor off, and I'm playing the same kind of thing, just there. So playing that loop. And I'll turn on the compressor now. That's with it on. Compared to with it off. And we can do the same thing, just guitar-wise, you know. Just... Okay, and that's without the compressor. And, here's with the compressor. Sound. If I turn that off, and I will go ahead and play over that loop, the bass loop we have there. Alright, now just as an example again, we're going to play the loop without the compressor and then the loop with the compressor. So let's start without the compressor. Here, I'll play some things without the compressor on guitar and then with the compressor. Alright, so this is just the guitar thing, you know, just playing. If I play the same thing with the compressor on, if I play it, you know, without the compressor, it's not quite as loud or punchy. Turn on the compressor. Turn off the compressor. If I play just that, just just on the bass emulation, I think it's pretty fascinating because it gets a really big sound, you know. Whereas here it's kind of it's okay, but. With the compressor on. And overall, I mean, when you're doing a loop of some sort, So I mean, there's a big difference between the two, I think. Just volume-wise and dynamics-wise. You know, with the compressor on, it's a much kind of punchier. You know, very interesting. And I find that with loops and things, you know, it really makes a nice balance, a smooth balance between the bass emulation and the guitar. Now, could you do without the compressor? Of course, you could. And it's a little, definitely lower in volume. Okay. So there you go. There's the compressor pedal. And this one is from a multi-effect, right? A TC Electronics Plethora. And the compressor in there is really nice. It's really good. I also have compressors in the Line 6 M5, but I don't actually have an individual compressor pedal at all. And, well, that's probably why I didn't use the compressor pedal, you know. So, anyway, I thought it was very, very interesting and not what I expected at all. Because I remember the good old days of compressor pedals, you know, introducing a ton of noise, you know, and also giving you that kind of real effect sound of a compressed guitar signal. And I always, as I mentioned, reference the Police, Andy Summers kind of guitar sound, you know, when he's going that click, 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 you know. So it has a very distinct sound. Whereas here, it's more of a overall sound, and it doesn't sound compressed, if that makes sense. And that is a very, very interesting, you know. So I just ran across that, and I thought I'd show it to you and see. Maybe it's something you could use, or maybe you do use it this way. You know, there's tons of different ways of using a compressor pedal, I discovered, depending where it is on this in the signal chain and that kind of thing. And I guess what kind of sound you want to go for too. You know, I found that this worked really well, especially with the looping stuff. You know, and I mean, I'm gonna keep experimenting with it, you know, because it does have some limitations, of course. You know, one of them, I think, you know, I think if you turn up the amps too much, it'll, you know, you're pushing that signal so much hotter into the guitar amp than you would without it, you know, so that makes a difference. But anyway, it's something I'm going to continue working with and things. But I highly recommend that you experiment with this compressor pedal, because it does a lot more than you'd expect, you know. Especially more modern compressor pedals, you know. Because the old ones, you know, you get that classic compressor clean sound, but it affects the clean tone so much, you know, that's not something you'd want to use all the time, if that makes sense. You know, whereas the other new ones, I think we're blending in the original signal and those kinds of things. You can get a real compressed volume and things without it sounding too compressed to where you could use it all the time. Anyway, this is one way of using it, and I found it very, very interesting. So I thought I'd share it with you here. Let me know what your thoughts are on in the comments, you know, and your experience with compressor pedals, you know. But I'll tell you what, I found it to be quite a pleasant surprise using it at the end of the signal chain, if that makes sense. All right, very good. See you next time. Okay, bye.